It has been a big week in football, no doubt about it, with the revelations today that have absolutely gutted the football world. Matthew Lloyd, Caroline Wilson, Ross Lyon. First off, can I get your first impressions when you heard the news today, Lordy?
Oh, an absolute shock. And Ed, I just wrote down these words that you hear from the AFL boss, Hawthorn, Luke Hodge: disturbing, distressing, harrowing.
Caro?
And Luke Hodge talked about the young men and the boys, but what about the women, some of who have clearly chosen now to tell their stories and have a voice, and the way they were allegedly treated by a football club? Ed, we see two coaching careers, great coaching careers, hanging in the balance, and an AFL commissioner's future on the commission hanging in the balance, not to mention the spillover effect of so many other people involved in the footy industry. It's just a horrible, disgraceful story, if in any way true. OK, so we'll get to that in a moment. There are allegations as we speak. Ross?
Yeah, well, in shock and trying to, like all of us, get our head around the allegations, and it's disorientating in a real sense, because there's pillars of our football community that are engaged in this report. So, but I think natural justice is important here also.
The report was commissioned by the Hawthorn Football Club. It was handed down late last week. The AFL have had a couple of days to have a look at it. Today, a story by ABC reporter Russell Jackson. And Caro, just as we read through some of the lines here in this story, you can take us through as well the difference between the report and actually what Russell then was able to extrapolate in his story today on the ABC. Ian is the nom de plume for the player, but it's alleged that a group of coaches, including Alistair Clarkson and Chris Fagan, ushered him into an office where he was urged to have the pregnancy terminated, get rid of his partner and move into the home of an assistant coach. Clarkson just leaned over me and demanded that I needed to get rid of my unborn child and my partner. I was then manipulated and convinced to remove my SIM card from my phone so there was no further contact between my family and me. They told me I'd be living with one of the other coaches from that night onwards. Caro, take us through this whole situation from here.
We're going to look at the Alistair Clarkson statement later, a very combative and I would have thought ill-advised statement, personally. Chris Fagan, I'm told, is... Chris Fagan and people close to him are not sure that Chris Fagan was actually at that meeting, and I think Chris Fagan has told the Brisbane Lions that he doesn't recall that he wasn't at that meeting. The truth will come out, Ed, but so obviously there are different versions of events, and as we keep saying, they're allegations, but, you know, both these men, we're looking at them now, part of that great... Well, the 3 premierships in a row and one a few years earlier that Alistair Clarkson was also involved in, they've been tainted, in my view, and, you know, so much went on behind the scenes. To hear the captain say he had no idea it was going on. What goes on at football clubs and how much do people ever really know? We should say that Gillan, and even close teammates say they had no idea. Gillan McLachlan spoke today about the review panel. That'll be announced tomorrow or the next day. So it'll be made up of 4 people, 2 women, and there will also be 2 Indigenous representatives. They've learnt their lesson from the Adelaide Camp Review, where basically a group of Indigenous players, including Carl Amon, Stephen May and Sean Burgoyne, spoke to Gillan McLachlan about the fact that, you know, those Adelaide players were really being reviewed by ex-white cops, and so that will change. The hope is that this review will be completed, or the investigation into these allegations will be completed within 2 months.
Yes, it's going to be on. The pressure's on. There'll be a King's Counsel and also a senior barrister who'll do a lot of the investigation into this, and it's going to be interesting to see, before we just move on to the other quotes of the day, the terms of reference. Does the AFL investigation lead to charges of conduct unbecoming? If there is a suspension, who issues that? And of course, at some stage, I think we're all going to end up in the major courts as well down the track.
You mentioned suspension there. Do you believe, though, that if they're either guilty and out of the game altogether, or they're, you know, or they're clear?
Well, that's what I think. I think really, if these allegations are proven, Alistair Clarkson and Chris Fagan will not coach again.
Interesting, though, they're just there that amazing. It says Chris Fagan was in the room. Chris Fagan saying doesn't even know he wasn't there. So that's how tricky and difficult a situation this is.
Let's have a look at the quote that came from Chris Fagan today. He said he was not consulted during the Hawthorn-sponsored review and looks forward to the opportunity to be heard as part of the AFL investigation. So he didn't say that in his release today, but that's what we're hearing from around the football traps. North Melbourne put out a statement later this afternoon. First of all, it came from Chris Fagan, and then the Kangaroos came out and said this: Alistair was due to commence work with North Melbourne on November 1. However, he will delay the start of his tenure to allow time to fully appreciate or to participate in this investigation. And then finally, Alistair Clarkson came out with his statement, and he reiterated what was said by Chris Fagan, in that he was not involved at any stage in any of the discussions into the report. I was therefore shocked by the extremely serious allegations reported in the media earlier today. I was not interviewed by the authors of the report commissioned by the club, nor have I been provided with a copy of the report. I was not afforded any due process, and I refute any allegation of wrongdoing or misconduct and look forward to the opportunity to be heard as part of the AFL external investigation.
Very interesting, Edna. This was the Hawthorn Football Club, as a result of initially allegations made about his treatment at his time at the club, Cyril Rioli and his wife Shannon, and followed up by Leon Egan, who was the Indigenous liaison officer at the time that Cyril was there. Briefly, he was there. This urged the club to do this review. It wasn't about talking to white people. It was about talking to players who were at the club, in First Nations players and officials who were at the club at the time. This report was then given to the AFL because Hawthorn read this and was so shocked by what they saw and realised they were not equipped to deal with some of these allegations. They sent it to the AFL's integrity unit. Russell Jackson has now, whether he's seen the report, I'm not sure that he has. I think he has also been doing just investigative journalism and has found this stuff out separately. So I don't really think that Alistair needed to be part of the Hawthorn review.
Yeah, but he should have been told once they had the report.
Russell Jackson went to Alistair Clarkson.
If the AFL and Hawthorn have had the report, Caro, for a week with these blistering allegations, surely that should have been put to them at some stage.
Well, what have the AFL been doing in that work?
I'm told that Russell Jackson went to all parties on Monday with some of the allegations.
Yeah, but my understanding from Brisbane was that it was sent to Brisbane to the general number on the email.
He still contacted them.
I know, but what I'm saying is surely either Hawthorn or the AFL, having had this report for a number of days, just out of courtesy, should have gone to both of these people and said, these are the allegations that have been made to you.
Well, I think they've spoken to a lot of people. The AFL has also denied that they're not just leaping into action now because it's been made public, but I think this has certainly precipitated the process.
So you're saying the journalists did go to Fagan and ask the question and did go to Clarkson?
According to the ABC report.
Because that's journalistic rigour, isn't it?
He
need to give the opportunity.
Yep.
So they would have known today this isn't a shock, because he would have left a message. I'm ringing in.
It was an email that went to the club and it went to the general number. It doesn't matter. Let's not get caught in the weeds.
I think it's important because, were they aware?
They were all contacted.
Yeah.
They were all
Let's move on anyway. Let's hear what Gil McLachlan had to say today.
We got it about a week ago. I've read the report. There's more today that is not in the report, and obviously it's a tough read. We need to provide natural justice and allow that process to go on, but we will seek to have that panel in place as quickly as possible and work with the Hawthorn Football Club, the consultant who prepared the report, and the players and partners involved to engage with them to expedite it and not extend the trauma.
Yeah, so the reverberations have gone as far as AFL Commission, and it was released tonight. I want to also acknowledge that this is a really distressing day for the people who have shared their experiences, said Richard Goyder, the AFL Commissioner. These are serious allegations. It's important that we treat them appropriately while also ensuring the formal process provides support to those impacted and also natural justice to those people who are accused. Andrew Newbold, the then president of the Hawthorn Football Club, now on the AFL Commission, wholeheartedly understands this, and I've accepted his offer to take a leave of absence away from the AFL Commission while the independent investigation is undertaken. And that is just straightforward governance and should be admired there, but that's just what would have had to have happened.
He would have been asked to step down. Chris Fagan would have been asked to have stepped aside, and so would Alistair
The bit
Clarkson.
I didn't understand when Gillen said there was more today that wasn't in the report. What piece was that?
Was that be from the article by...
Russell Jackson's interviews with the people involved at the club at the time. not part of the Hawthorn review.
Karen, how much of this will be word v word versus how much is on text message evidence, all those types of things, do you think?
There'll be a lot of different versions of events.
Yeah.
And I don't think there'll be much text message evidence, if any at all, but that's going to be really interesting.
So let's have a look at the Hawks in charge at that stage. Andrew Newbold, we just mentioned, is now stood down from the AFL Commission. Stuart Fox is the MCC Chief Executive. Tim Silvers was the Chief Operating Officer, now the CEO of the Adelaide Football Club. Mark Evans was the General Manager of Football, as the Chief Executive of Gold Coast. Chris Fagan is the Football Manager. Brisbane Lions, as we know, was Football Manager, now the coach. And Alistair Clarkson is the coach of North Melbourne. And you can probably throw in Graham Wright, who was working in recruiting in those days. Nowhere near it. But
he was involved with Cyril Rioli at the time he left the club. And of course, Jason Burt has also been heavily mentioned in the Russell Jackson article. He's not working at an AFL club at the moment.
Sam Mitchell and Sean Burgoyne. Sean Burgoyne was involved in this report. Of course, a venerated Indigenous leader at the Hawthorn Football Club. Let's hear what they had to say today.
It's very confronting, to be honest, to see that and hear that, because I had no knowledge of those incidences ever happening. I was never involved. I was never asked. This is the first I've heard of it being involved in this process. So it's very confronting, considering I was there.
The fact that as we were part of the organisation at that time, it's enormously troubling now, and how to, right now as the coach of the club, how to lead our people forward.
It just shows how much trouble the club, what a bad Indigenous and cultural series of programs they had at the club at the time, that Sean Burgoyne had no idea that this was going on. As you know, I wrote about this earlier in the year. Leon Egan was the Indigenous liaison officer. Players and others at the club, including Leon, begged the club to put him on more than one day a week. The club refused, said they didn't have the money. Leon Egan ended up leaving. This was the article about Shannon and Cyril Rioli, about why they left the club. And this is a Leon Egan comment. They, the Hawks, were victims of their own success. It doesn't excuse it, but that's the way it was. They were too busy winning to worry about issues like putting in place adequate cultural awareness. Leon Egan also trained at the club Ross in the late 80s and was later told you never would have got a game there because back then there was a policy that we did not field Indigenous players, and the club has now acknowledged that.
Well, the numbers would tell you that. Historically, the numbers
Leon Egan went
that.
back to the club. Leon Egan today, who took part in this review and who really precipitated the review, is a shattered and very, very emotional man. And I just want to mention the Riolis. They were really bad-mouthed as a result of their bravery in coming out earlier this year and talking about their view of their time at the club. Ex-teammates came to me and bad-mouthed Shannon Rioli and sort of blamed her. Shannon asked Sam Rioli. Terrible rumours were spread about Cyril Rioli that were not true. And you know, sometimes the whistleblowers are the ones who get picked on, and that makes me very sad.
Just before we move on, I just want to put it to the three of you. I think the AFL, when they do this review, have to come out with a finding, not leave it to the pub test or the court of public opinion. If they're going to rub them out, they've got to rub them out, and they've got to be able to then appeal whatever that is there. I think there's a little bit of work to be done. It's all happened in a rush today. I think Gil McLachlan handled himself impeccably. But the next stage is just as important, because the framework now has to be there, because this has been going on.
Coming as it's done, you know, in the middle of what has been a triumphant time, it must be said, I hate to be shallow for the AFL, this is just a dreadful stain on the final series.
I know we're talking about Indigenous culture, but this is also, if the allegations prove to be true, or how we get to the end point, I don't know, but it's beyond colour. It's managing young players and
their families.
Yeah, it's more than colour here, but it also highlights soft cap and money and resources, and coaches, you know, staying in your lane and delegating to experts.
And I think we've also got to look at the media as well. The desperation, the hero zero mentality every week, and the pressure that's applied. Don't forget, these guys were all deified for their hard edge. The unsociable Hawks was what
Hawthorn prioritised. They just did not prioritise Indigenous welfare policies at the time. They had all these Indigenous players.
Lordy, I want to show the knock-on effect. I want to get your thoughts on this. Probably the team that's copped it the most is North Melbourne, who've copped the drive-by shooting and all this. So Benamafia is finishing up largely at the behest of Alistair Clarkson. The football manager is out as well. Todd Viney, who comes in with Alistair Clarkson, he's in an invidious situation in the interim. 3 assistant coaches out, not yet replaced, and they've got to try and get some players into the club in the next month who are all coming because Alistair Clarkson was there.
Yeah, so we must say that our only thoughts are with the Indigenous players and the families, and this comes right off the back of it, and you look at the flow-on effect. But what must Sonia Hood be thinking? I did a function with a North assistant, and he said, we're going 2 coaches short this year because of the cost that Clarkson comes, what Todd Viney comes with. So they'll need to really go and reapply again for a coach if it gets to that point. I think all the players that have been sold that, I'm nominating North Melbourne.
How does Griffin Logue feel today? How does Jed Anderson feel, who plays with North, an Indigenous player who was at Hawthorn at the time these allegations took place and is out of contract at the moment
Will
at the North
Ashcroft,
Melbourne Football
Josh
Club?
Dunkley, there's a lot of flow on.